This is one of the greatest ever endgames that was ever played, in which Capablanca sacrifices two pawns, which are normally worth the weight of gold in an endgame because there is so much less materials, and to get a superior position and to win the game in this match. So Capablanca is playing with the white pieces, and he's playing the queen's gambit, and after the knight to f6 move, basically, which is the Howitz defense, which is played by black. The bishop goes to g5 and the bishop to e7, protecting that knight, and protecting the queen from the pin as well. And the knight goes to c3 and castles on the king side. Savielly, who is playing with the black pieces. So e3 by Capablanca and b6 by Savielly, bringing his bishop into the b7 square, finishing this bishop and getting an attack on the king side very early. So bishop to d3 by Capablanca and bishop to b7 by Savielly, and castles on the king side. And queen goes to e8 with the intent of coming into the king side through this open light square diagonal, and queen goes to e2 as well. So the knight jumps to e4 now, creating an attack, a double attack on the bishop here through this discovered attack on the bishop and also with the knight as well. So the bishops get exchanged, and before taking back the bishop, the knight to c3 move is played, and the pawn takes back the knight, creating this double pawn on the c3 and c4 of Capablanca. And after that, the bishop is taken back with the queen, and a4 by Capablanca, pushing his pawns on the queen side. So now the bishop takes the knight, and the queen takes the bishop back, and also there is an attack on the rook, which is actually covered with the knight to c6 move. And after that, the rook comes to b1 and trying to activate the rook on this semi-open b file, and the rook to e8 is played by Savielly, creating a battery on the e line, which is not yet open. And the king goes to h3, the king of Capablanca goes to h3, and the rook comes to f6, trying to prevent any pawn openings here, and an attack on the h7 square with the queen and the bishop combination. And f4 by Capablanca, and knight jumps to a5 by Savielly, and the queen comes back to f3 and d6 by Savielly. And both the players are moving around their pieces, trying to get into a better position for the end game. And after the queen to d7 move, the pawn push of e4 happens, and the f pawn takes the e4 pawn, and the queen takes back, creating a check threat. It won't be mate. And after for that, g6 is played, creating blocking this queen uh, bishop battery. And after g3, it creates a nice little pawn structure for the end game for Capablanca as well. So the king comes to f8, and Capablanca brings his king to g2, and the rook goes to f7. And Savielly's pieces are basically not that much active due to his own pawns, and they are they're not that active basically, so which becomes very difficult in the end game, and loses his advantage. So after the d5 move attacking the queen, the pawn takes the pawn, and the pawn takes the pawn back, getting rid of this isolated pawn. And after the into d5, the queen takes this rook, because this pawn exchange exposed this battery against on the rooks. But the queen can take, because once the queen takes back, you can take back the queen, and the king will take back the queen. And now the h5 is played. Basically, once this pawn is exchanged, the rook can come here, and the rook will infiltrate the black camp. And once the rooks are in the seventh rank, cutting off the king, it becomes very dangerous for in any game basically. So, and after the rook f6 move, trying to support this the pawn exchange, because even if you don't put your rook here, the bishop can take the pawn with a check, and you lose one more pawn, and these two pawns will become really really dangerous without any blockage. So the rook now comes to h1, and because there are some weakness on the queen side, but uh, Capablanca just goes in for the attack with the rook, trying to cut off the king, and also launching an attack on the seventh rank, and also trying to push his pawns basically. So the king goes to f8, which is a defensive move which should have been avoided, because the only way to win in such position is to go for counter attacks, and defense might not always work. So now the rook comes to c6. With the rook on the 7th rank, you cannot bring your king up the board now, and the rook of Savielly goes to c6, attacking this lone pawn over here. But you can't take it yet, because if the rook take it, this pawn will be gone, and these two pawns will be marching down the board with the support of the rook and the king. So now g4 is played. So basically, here the earlier position applies, and the knight comes to c4, and the pawn is again pushed to g5, getting themselves a pass pawn Capablanca. And after the knight jumps to e3, the king comes up to f3, and knight again jumps to f5, and the bishop takes the knight. Normally, on in endgames, you won't go for exchange of bishop versus knight, because bishops are long range pieces, and this is not like an open position. But normally, you won't exchange the bishop with a knight. But the intent here is that once this pawn takes back the bishop, you can now push this pawn all the way, trying to queen it, and with the help of the rook here, and the king can also come up here and trying to support the pawn and the rook to get this pawn queen as well. So for that, basically, Capablanca was willing to sacrifice his material, that too with a check. And now this white's move, and white pushes his king to g3 with the intent of bringing your king up and trying to queen this pawn up. So immediately Savielly captures the pawn, and the king moves up to the early square e4, or early square up, I meant, and the rook comes to f3, attacking this pawn as well. And now the pawn push of g6 happens. Very crucial move which allows the king to come up. And once this pawn is taken, and the king comes to g5, attacking the rook, so the rook will have to move, and you can capture this pawn after that. So, but the rook moves here, so you gave up two of your pawns in an end game, and it's basically very risky in an end game. But the calculation was right for Capablanca. His plan was his confidence on this pass pawn over here, and trying to get it queen, and it creates pressure. It's already on the 6th rank, and one more push, it goes into the 7th rank, and the king can come up to support it after it. So after that, the king goes up to f6. He didn't try to capture this pawn, because once you capture this pawn, the rook will come down, and he will start bringing in perpetual checks, going for a draw, or even capture of the pawns, or getting your losing your position. So that's why this pawn was kept there. Now the king comes to g8, trying to prevent this pawn from queening, going to the queening square, and the rook goes to g7 with a check, and the king goes to h8, and after that, one of the pawns get captured, and the rook goes to e8, which allows the capture of the other pawn. So basically, he gave up two pawns only to win back two of the pawns. And also now Capablanca have the superior position with rook cutting off on the 7th rank. Rook cuts off the king on the 7th rank, and this pawn is getting ready to be queen, or the least you will win the rook, and with that the game as well. So the rook again comes to e4, trying to launch attacks on the checks on the king. So that's why this pawn was not taken. So once it's taken, the checks happened. So now this pawn push creates a check. So here actually you can take this pawn with your rook, and once the rooks get exchanged, this pawn will be taken, and because of the king's position, Capablanca will win the game. So he didn't go for the rook exchange, and the king goes to g8, and after that another pawn is taken, and Capablanca is basically up by a pawn now after going down by 2 pawn, and another pawn is taken now. So it's just one pawn against 3 pawn, and the rook comes to c1, and basically here king to d6, and which allows the pushing of another pawn. And after the following moves, this pawn is going up. You can even give up one of your pawns, and focus on the two of the pawns to get them queen, basically. So a great endgame technique, and from this position, I think Savielly resigned the game, and a continuation will basically look like this. And once the king goes here, you'll have to capture this pawn, otherwise it will queen, and you will have to capture the queen anyways. So once the rook captures back, you can because this pawn is still on the fourth rank, and you still have time to get queen. So now the rook goes here, trying to attack the pawn, and the king goes closer to the uh, you know to the black's king, and after the pawn is taken, his pawn is taken, and the rook comes to b6, cutting off the king again, and it goes to b7, cutting off the king again, and after the following moves, checkmate will happen like this on the board. So great endgame technique, giving up two pawns to get a superior advantage and creating pressure on the 7th and 8th rank by cutting off the king and also trying to queen one of your pawns. And in such positions, it's very very insightful game for all chess players, and one of the greatest end games that we have ever seen actually. So thanks very much for watching. We'll be back with more such videos.